Today we're returning to, well, what we do best. We have an awesome guest lined up, and so starting 2016, we're going to be changing things up just a little bit. And so, what are some of the things that we do best? Well, according to Roku Depot and others, authors, voice actors, well, that's what we have planned for the next couple of weeks. So today we're going to be starting a new segment with an old guest, or at least an old style of guest. Today we're having an author, so this is going to be our first time in 2016 where we're going to have the Writer's Room.
Comics writing at this point is easier for me, and it's partly because I've done more of it.
My favorite line in the book is, "My name is not Rukia."
I was a little kid, so I was writing a world to set my own fantasy short stories in.
Basically, they threw that at me and said, what can you do with it? So I came up with the idea that became Star Wars Galaxy of Fear.
It was very, very baptism by fire, as it were. And so in comparison, this was actually, quote-unquote, easy.
I have never had a job or anything else in my life that I've enjoyed as much as writing.
Today's guest is one who's been on the show before. It is author Erin M. Evans, returning for the third time to Bombard Radio. Her first time on the show was with The Adversary, the middle book of the great Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms series, The Sundering, which featured a lot of big authors on this program. And then we had her on last year for Fire in the Blood, the next book in the Brimstone Angels series, continuing with her characters that she was using in The Adversary, which, of course, were her characters from the first couple Brimstone Angel books. And this time we have her back to discuss her newest book, Ashes of the Tyrant, the newest book in the Brimstone Angels series. So, we're going to have Erin M. Evans on, but first of all, let's have a little bit from Audible.com, a sample from Ashes of the Tyrant, so you can hear a little bit of her newest novel. And then, author Erin M. Evans returning to the show.
One day, he came to the 7 wise elders with a heavy heart, and Nazari, who would be Kepeshk Molek, wisest among them, asked, "What troubles you so?" "Oh, my elders," he said, "I have found a hole in the Golden's grip. 3 foolish Osiri carry her messages and weapons to the northern citadels. They do not watch as the slaves load their cargo. They do not mind when the load is uneven, and they do not check to see what they carry. Many could flee on their backs, many could be saved. But as I thought this, I realized it would be folly indeed. Not all could be saved, and especially not the elders. It would take great strength to cling to the harness, great stillness not to catch the eyes of even a foolish Osir. Forgive me, I forgot myself." Nazari went away with the other elders, and when they returned, she said to Shasfar, "You are among our wisest and most honorable. Prove it now. Rarakimdar the Golden plans to keep you in her claws for all time, to better breed strong-limbed slaves. You must flee. Take as many of the young ones, as many of the eggs as you can, onto the backs of the Osiri. Bring them down as they fly and flee into the mountains." "You will be killed," Shasfar said. "We will die so you may live."
So you just had Ashes of the Tyrant come out. How does it feel to have a book come out right after having a kid? Like, how was this release different from all your other books as far as your stress level, your apprehension, and how does it feel to have the book finally out there and people beyond the stingy reviewers reading it?
It's exciting. I think having it come out right after Christmas was a little more stressful than the baby. It's actually the second book I've had come out right after a baby. My first son was born about the same time that Brimstone Angels came out. So I've done that part before. But end of December is a really crazy busy time. So I think it's just now starting to pick up speed with reviewers and bloggers and things like that, now that everybody's done with their holiday stress.
I mean, everyone's done watching Star Wars. Well, they aren't done watching Star Wars. They left the theater for the first time and are now going to read.
I finally got to. I found a theater that had a you can bring your baby and it's okay if they cry kind of thing. So on Tuesday, I finally saw it after avoiding all the spoilers.
I guess that would be easier for you since you just had a kid to avoid spoilers because you don't really have a lot of time or energy to do things.
Well, the trouble though is like when you're sitting and you're nursing and you're like rocking a fussy baby at 2 a.m, it's really easy to just go to Facebook. And so for the first week, everybody was so good about it, and I felt like, okay, I have to go see this just to honor the restraint everyone is showing. And then after 2 weeks, the cracks started to show because you just really want to talk about it. So I was like, okay, we're going to make this happen.
So I always wondered this. As an author, do you ever find it weird when they release books right after Christmas? Since, in retail, after Christmas you have about a week, maybe two, and then all of a sudden like retail dies until Valentine's and sometimes Easter, all the way to Easter. You ever wonder why they release books right after Christmas?
I have heard it's because people don't buy books in December. And my experience has been I've had I think The Adversary came out in early December because of the way they were doing the releases, and I did a reading, and yeah, it's really hard to get people to come out when it's cold and it's wet and you can buy things online. So there's a little less being able to see the book on the shelf kind of presence. But right after Christmas, everybody's got gift cards. So you do get a little burst before it gets kind of dormant again. Obviously, summer is the best time because that's, when people are, I guess too, actually at the end of December, you might catch people whose New Year's resolution is read more books. So they're wandering the aisles like, what else can I pick up? I know.
So they rely on the gift card crowd and New Year's. I guess that makes sense. That makes much more sense.
There's not a lot about publishing that really makes sense, but you try to find the best connections you can.
So this question actually came from my wife because, this book, you've released quite a few books now, so I guess it's a different experience every time you release one, or at least you get more used to the apprehension. But how has the very first time you released your first Forgotten Realms book, or your, especially with Brimstone Angels, with this new character that people had never seen before, with a race that's kind of not used very much in Forgotten Realms, how is the experience releasing your very first novel different from Ashes of the Tyrant just came out on the 29th?
Oh, so this is my first book is actually The Godcatcher, which was a standalone book, and this is the story of my experience. I went to the bookstore to try to find it in the wild, and actually the Borders I went to first didn't have any, because they'd only stocked like 2 and they'd sold. And then I went to another bookstore and saw it, and I was hit by this just wave of embarrassment, like I'd left my laundry sitting on the shelf or something. Like that's no, you're not supposed to see that. It was a very like baby writer kind of experience from where you're like, you're a kid filling up notebooks with your stories and you don't want anyone to see them because they might, have an opinion. And, by now that's burnt out of me. I want you to read them and I want you to have an opinion. And it gets easier every time to kind of realize at some point in the middle, I came to the sort of not just understanding, but true belief that every time you write a book, as many people that buy that book, there are that many versions of it out there. So, like I sell, 100,000 copies, everybody's bringing their own stuff to the story. And so for some people that book just sings, right? It really speaks to something that you've, and you've experienced. I had a letter from a guy once who really identified with the character Mehen, whose kind of broad arc over the series is learning to learning to deal with the fact that his adopted daughters are adults, and they're like going to go out and have their own lives and have their own dangers and have to deal with them on their own, where he wants to kind of like take them home and lock them in their room and make sure nothing bad ever happens to them. And he had lost a child when he was younger, and he found that like reading about that was really cathartic, and it was, I don't know, it's one of those things where you just realize that you write these stories and maybe they're kind of silly fantasy fluff, but within the story there's something that might really touch someone and make them have a better day at least.
Do you ever have that apprehension when the book first comes out and you just want to click the Amazon link just to see what people are saying, but at the same time you might not want to see what people are saying right away?
Yes. It's funny when I did The Sundering, which was it was sort of a crisis crossover series with 6 different authors, and all of whom are much more established than I was or am even. And every one of those, okay, first of all, those guys are wonderful. They're all just fantastic, delightful people. Even if they want you to think that they're scary and not. But each of them separately kind of pulled me aside and said, this is when things are going to get crazy, right? Because before that point, the books that I'd written had, they were paperbacks. They didn't have as much push behind them. So people knew, people read them. They sold pretty well, but it wasn't on the level of The Adversary where it was like, this is the story of everything that happens to the Forgotten Realms, right? And when you publish a book that gets that much kind of attention, you get all kinds of attention. So whereas my previous books were like, I have 20 5-star reviews on Amazon and nothing less. And they're like, no, now you're going to get people who really just are going to trash your book for whether, it's because they really didn't like it or they're really upset about something that happened because within the world. And so stop reading reviews. Don't read reviews anymore. And I have to admit, I didn't really believe them completely. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then I read them anyway. And it's true. Once a book gets an audience that big, you get more audience that loves it, and you get more audience that really doesn't want to read about a teenage girl. So I've broken myself of the urge to read all the reviews. I'll click on the Amazon link and see if the number is going up. But the other thing that was really nice to good advice to get, Troy Denning told me that he actually worries if he writes a book and it gets its average rating is in the 4 to 5 stars, because it means he didn't really grab that many people. That when you get down into the 3s, that's when you're reaching a really wide audience and people really care about this book, because some of them really hate it and really need to tell you that. And
when it came to the Sundering, you had Salvatore starting, who's kind of the lead-off man in most of the Forgotten Realms, and he's probably the most safest because it's Drizzt, and people are like, it's Drizzt, it's
and
number 34.
He's gonna get 400 reviews anyway, so if 100 of them are terrible, it's still.
And then there was you followed Kemp, and Kemp, he writes dark stuff. His stuff is a very dark thing. And then you had after you had more of the lighter stuff with Byers Denning, and then of course Greenwood, who was the grandpa of the series. Everyone loves him anyway, so.
Yeah.
So I guess right in the middle is when people would be like, oh, this is what the series is doing, and if they don't like it, they know by then. If they love it, they know by then. And,
yeah, I think it held its own.
Yeah, I agree.
It was different than with the Godcatcher, my very first book. I have to admit I was a little smug. It's like, everybody loves this book, and it's like, well, that's because your audience is this little slice of people, and now more people read the book and more people have opinions.
And because you wrote in The Adversary, which part of the Sundering, I know Fire and the Blood got a lot more attention because it tied in so well with other books that happened in the Sundering afterward. And then Ashes of the Tyrant I have right next to me, it just came in the mail about an hour ago, so I need to read it. But
that one
from what I've
got more of the sort of Sundering events that maybe got skipped over because they were kind of further out. I'll say.
Because I know the last one definitely tied in a lot more with Denning's book, actually.
Yeah.
Called The Sentinel, which I loved how it tied into there.
Oh, thank you.
And Ashes, from what I've been told by publisher, it's more of, this one is more of a focused murder mystery type event, and more of a character thing than the broad tale that we got in the last two. Would you describe that as more correct, or?
I think it has those elements. For people who are into the setting and wanting more information about what happens in the Sundering, this is sort of this book and the next book. It's a little bit divided because of the story arc requirements that RPG had. It's about what's happening in the kind of old empires area. So this is about Time Anther. So if you're reading for the setting, this is here's why I think you should like Dragonborn. And also what happened to them during that era of crazy that we call the Sundering.
Funny story that you'd actually probably appreciate. My son, I was reading the back of this book out loud to my son because he wanted to hear something read to him about half an hour ago. And I get to the point where it says Dragonborn, and he touches my phone, and it plays my ringtone, which is the Fus Ro Dah from Skyrim. Right after I got to Dragonborn, it's like, Fus Ro Dah! It's like, oh, goodness. Wrong Dragonborn.
That's adorable.
But it works.
Yeah.
So with this, you've done quite a few pretty great interviews, actually, and some good articles. One of which definitely caught my attention was the one where you talk about writing in a shared world.
Yeah.
And Forgotten Realms is a massive shared world. I guess you're all sharing with Ed Greenwood. And, you guys, this is a world that over the years have just expanded, changed, focused. different editions of events that have reshaped it, moved things around. There's so much to go into this world, and I really loved your points that you made in that article. You made three of them, three main ones anyway. And the one that really caught my attention, because I also read a lot of Star Wars books, and I've read StarCraft books, Dragonlight, a lot of shared worlds, and you read a lot of fan fiction, even wrote some fan fiction. And one of the things you pointed out is focus on the small and not necessarily the big, but at the same time, don't over describe it or overemphasize things.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful point, because in a lot of books I've read, some people just go into over detail no matter what. It can be a book that's really small, but at the same time, they're just detailing everything. So how is this something you came by more as a writer or more as an editor? That I know you did a lot with Forgotten Realms as well.
I think it's kind of, I mean, it's by necessity, it's kind of a mix. Editing influenced my writing, and writing influenced my editing in a lot of ways. But you get a feel for, I have gotten a feel for when you need one of those details and when it's sort of overkill. And I understand the urge. Man, I understand the urge. Like, this book, I feel like I did get to go a little bit farther than normal, because there's so much about the Dragonborn that hasn't really been detailed. And so, it comes to things like, well, what do they eat? What's Dragonborn cuisine like? It's really tempting to be like, here's a feast scene every 3 chapters because I thought of something else that might be cool. But kind of focusing those down so that you put it in there when it matters to the character's experience. And I think that's the main thing, is that you want to make sure you're giving readers details that point them back to the character and the character's story and the character's experience. Because especially when you're working in a shared world that's got, all these RPG source books, I think there's a temptation there for a lot of people to kind of go and just talk to the setting and just talk about the setting. Because that's kind of what you do if you're a DM. You let the characters kind of do their own thing and you build the world around them. But with a novel, you kind of have to do that in reverse. You have to kind of speak to the characters and let the setting build itself around them. But yeah, and there's that sense of like, the more those little details you put in, the farther you can move from the character's story, and it ends up being it's me talking to you, right? It's not you experiencing, Farida and Mehen and Dumuzi's story. It's me reading out a source book in a way.
And, because I remember reading some of these, I think it might have actually been during the Sundering series, when, like, Kemp writes this stuff and big things happen with Mephistopheles. I'm like, oh, of course, everyone needs to know about this. The rest of these books are going to reference it, and none of them touch it at all. A couple of times... I referenced it! Yeah, you did, but, like, I'm going on, like, some of them, they go on and they're just, and you're just like, why wouldn't they have known this? But then if you look at the world, like, where these books are taking place, the world's huge. Yeah. And it's just at the age of the internet. They aren't going to go on Facebook and go, oh, this happened. There's no way they know, and for all these events. And if you focus on those big events, as you mentioned here, you miss out on the small things. You miss out on, who these people are, all these powerful character moments that would happen if you just focus on what they're doing and what's important then. And I like that. That's a really, really good point. And then the other one, you call attention to something only when it needs it. I can't tell how many books I've read where the author, we'll just go into Star Wars, since you mentioned how you saw Star Wars recently. Like the author will say, this character's on Coruscant, and then go into pages of detail, like George R. R. Martin level detail about Coruscant. Like, we all know what it looks like. You don't have to tell me. If you don't know what it looks like by now, it's a big city planet. Duh, description done. But they go into so much detail, and you went in there well, I guess you can summarize your own point, but the basic thing is only call attention when it's needed, not. Yeah, there's a I think Stephen King had it in his sort of memoir/writing guide on writing. And he talks about in Carrie, like, he doesn't go into a lot of detail about what Carrie looks like, because everybody knows a Carrie. Like, everybody knew that girl, right? And you can fill in those details for yourself. And unless it really, unless it's a detail that really matters, that you really need to stick, putting in the kinds of things that kind of let the reader fill the rest in, it's going to always be more powerful, right? Because if I hand you 16 details about a person's appearance and make you hold all of those in your head, it's tough. It's not going to work, and you're going to get bored.
But if I give you like, 2 or 3 and they imply things between them or let you fill in things between them, then, we can get on with the story a lot faster.
Agreed. And then, of course, the final point, which you did bring up in this article, which people can find at the sfsignal.com, is, perception matters more than truth. And this is one that, when I was a kid, I didn't understand. When I was a kid, I was like, tying it in with, Forgotten Realms. I'm like, well, of course everyone knows Drist is amazing. Drist is amazing. He does all this stuff and Loth and all, saved all these people. But the more you read, the more you realize how many people actually saw him do this. How many people actually know that he actually did that rather than just hearing stories in a pub.
Right.
So all these different characters. And, you mentioned how, there's gods, well, now, again, in the Forgotten Realms. And it's not like they're going to have a battle royale to see who's actually more powerful in front of all the people. It's like it is here, and you covered this really well. If people believe one thing, of course they're going to believe their god is more powerful than the other one. Is it reality? No, but it's more interesting to know that they believe that.
Yeah. I think too, like when you're playing D&D, right? The rules matter. It does matter whether something is true or not true from the DM's perspective. But I think and I'll say when I play, like the game I play in, the DM is very good at kind of being like here is the situation as you are experiencing it. Not in that kind of terms, but we kind of all understand that there might be more going on. And if you can cast a spell and it goes like this time, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything you believe about that is so. Or, I think of it like you're creating a world that it is sort of what, you have the rules, and the rules are sort of a codification of what this world might actually be like. In the same way that if you were playing, a game about the real world, you might still use hit points, for example, but we don't have hit points. That's not how people work, right? You don't have like a little well that ticks down and then ticks back up, right? There's what will kill one person might, someone else might be able to kind of muddle through and make it with some medical attention. And so you kind of think of where D&D needs things to be kind of more binary on paper. You don't really want that in a novel, because the only thing that matters is what that character is experiencing. And having those rules to kind of base off of what they might believe or what they might kind of understand to be true is, that's all part of doing it, right? It's part of doing the Forgotten Realms shared world. But it's sort of like you don't need to make sure that everybody understands that, this is true and this is false and it works exactly like this every time, because your character doesn't have a player's handbook. They don't have a monster manual.
Yeah, and a character who has a sense of flawed faith or devotion is far more interesting than a character who just matter-of-factly just follows the realities of life. Yeah. And that's just good writing. A flawed character is so much better than, as people say, a Mary Sue, or what's the guy's version?
I think it's a Gary Stew.
They still call them Mary Sues anyway. But rather than someone who's just perfect in everything, and that's what makes stories better. With your stories, Farida is not a perfect character.
No.
Never has been, and that's what makes her so good. She makes mistakes. Her family makes mistakes. Her sister, they all make mistakes. And that's what draws the story. That's what makes it interesting. If she never made a mistake, the book would just be there. It wouldn't have anything to draw you into to connect to, because no one's perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
And that definitely adds a lot. And by the way, not that you have to read these, but according to Amazon, they love the Dragonborn.
Oh, that's cool.
In fact, all the reviews say 5 stars due to Dragonborn awesomeness. Or 5 stars due to Dragonborn present.
Oh,
or
good.
4 stars highly recommended because Dragonborn are present. Even the one that has hardly anything says Dragonborn are in the backstory. 4 stars. So
that's
good
great.
move
Yay.
adding Dragonborn.
I think it's sort of it's sort of hard when you're writing in something where there's like been this major shift, like it was from 3rd to 4th edition, and there are definitely people who were really unhappy about it. You might have heard about this little thing called the Edition Wars. So
I heard more about changing to 4th edition than I have to anything else ever.
Right.
And
there's there are things about the way the Dragonborn were introduced that are sort of I don't want to say antithetical because that's way harsher. But I mean, Forgotten Realms has always had this really deep backstory, and that's been part of it. And Fourth Edition kind of tried to loosen it up so that you could come in and you didn't have to feel like you had to know everything. You've never had to know everything. But in doing so, some of the things that got introduced with a lot of space around them, and they sort of ended up feeling like maybe they got kind of tacked on, which is unfortunate because I know that the people who created that stuff, were thinking of some really cool ideas. So that's one thing that I really wanted to do was, kind of make the Dragonborn feel like they fit. I mean, they're kind of never going to fit. They're from another plane for people who haven't kept up with all of this stuff.
This is not the Fusro Da people.
No. So they were created on another plane called a beer to be sort of the perfect slaves to these dragon tyrants. And then they overthrew the dragon tyrants and set up their own kingdom and sort of functioned by fighting these dragons off constantly. When the spell plague came, they were thrown into Faerun, and they've set up their own nation kind of on top of where the country of Unther was. So they have this backstory that's really, I find that really interesting. Like, what does this culture look like when this is their origin story, right? And there had been sort of little details that had been created, some by Richard Lee Byers in his Brotherhood of the Griffin series, some for the Player's Handbook. But the vast majority of the lore that was created for Dragonborn was for the core setting for Narath. And in Narath, the Dragonborn were, they worshipped dragons. They were down with dragons. And that one detail immediately made large chunks of it not work because these Dragonborn hate dragons. They're not interested. And their whole backstory with dealing with these sort of tyrants that are greater and stronger than them means that they're basically as close as you can get to atheists in the realms. Like, you can't be in the Forgotten Realms and not believe in gods because they pop down and are like, what's up? But you can definitely have a race whose general outlook is this all that great? Like, why do I want to have to answer to this being that's kind of telling me do this or else? Like, no, we already dealt with this. We're not interested.
That's interesting. This leads me to a question that I might have, since he did write one of the sources that I can think of for this one, might have been better to ask this one to Salvatore someday. But as an editor of the Realms and someone who's written in the Realms and worked with lots of people, do you know where the idea that dragons are kind of like these gods or characters that can rule or be almost deities came from originally? Because in recent years we've had Dragon Age, which features a dragon, basically deity. We've had the one that Salvatore wrote with Todd McFarlane, the game Kingdoms of Amalur. Mm-hmm. We've had it in the Realms. We've had it, we have The Hobbit back in the day. We have, like, the idea that a dragon can be a deity and be worshipped and all these commanding things. Do you know where that originated from, or just how it keeps cycling back, or is it just something that we just gravitate to?
I think it's the latter. I think it's something you gravitate to. The idea that you have this creature that's clearly greater than you, that's older and more powerful, and I think in some ways that you can kind of see how that would become something sort of worthy of worship, like almost like an idol made flesh kind of thing. And if nothing else, you can understand how, I think you can understand how a group of people could come to rely on that creature as sort of a protector. And then it's only a half step from there to a god, right? The dragons in the Forgotten Realms, they range from like just some little beastie to really colossal ancient things that have been here since, time immemorial. And so you've got a handful of them there that, yeah, you could kind of see how that would go down. Not all of them are great, but
yeah, not all of them are great, but they just keep on coming, and so it's just curious to me because even as we mentioned Skyrim, we talked about there's dragons just keep coming back, and they're not like, Dragon Riders of Pern type dragons. They aren't like How to Train Your Dragon. These are like terrible deities.
Yeah,
And
I
guess it's just awesome writing.
I don't know. I guess it's kind of an embodiment of the unknowable terror of nature or something.
So this other question I have is, you've written I want to say 6 books in the realms,
yes.
And you've edited others or worked with others. How does it feel to work in the realms, and then when you're able to add something new to the realms itself? When you, as an author who's not one of the originators, not one of the ones who've been there for 20, 30 years, but when you get to come in there and then add something new to the realms that you can say, I did this, this is mine, this is not Greenwood's, not Salvatore's, not Denning's, this is mine. How does it feel to be able to add something into something that's so already rich and full of lore?
It's pretty cool. It's kind of funny because I've been doing this for so long, and I end up so immersed in it that by this point it's a little anticlimactic, I guess, because I'm like, okay, here's another thing, we can use this. But I have to admit that I tend to run things by Ed Greenwood because we're friends and I like talking to him and I like when he likes my ideas. But when he does like something, especially when it's stuff like tiefling stuff or dragonborn stuff, because I know that's sort of a little outside his core view, right? But when he tells me he likes it and starts being like, oh, and what if you did this? That's a wonderful feeling. It's very validating. And I think the first time it happened when I was, there's little things with the Godcatcher, like the notion that maybe the walking statues can do prophecy. But actually, I guess with Godcatcher, everything I added was sort of like, it had to be very like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And when it came to Brimstone Angels, and I had the sort of the story of the ascension of Asmodeus and where the 4th edition style tieflings came from, and that was a kind of a cool feeling when people were like, okay, let's do it, let's stick with that, because it's like, oh, my ideas fit here. So yeah, it's one of those things that if I stop and kind of think about it, it's pretty amazing.
Now, having met Ed Greenwood and talked with Ed Greenwood, I can't imagine him ever. Like, he just seems to be the night. One of all the authors I've talked to, he's literally like the one who can just. He's like talking to a grandpa who just sit back and just be nice and talk to you the whole time, and just so excited the entire time. He has so much energy, and that he created this decades ago. He's just so full of life for this. Have you ever presented an idea to him where he just goes, no? No.
Not like that, but I have told him ideas and had him sort of redirect me in an enthusiastic way that sort of suggests, like, no, you don't really like that idea. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a ton. But yeah, no, it's kind of disorienting when Ed is clearly not super keen on something, because when he's keen, he's very keen. He's a wonderful person to kind of bounce ideas off of, because when he likes them, he loves them. But yeah, it's I don't think he loves my dragonborn cuisine. I'll tell you the truth. I think he would like it to be a little more shocking and weird, and like monkey brains, and I'm like, nobody wants to eat monkey brains. That's too much work.
I can imagine Salvatore and Denning would be the type of ones that'd be like, no, don't do that, and we'd be more blunt about it. Especially Salvatore is more of a blunt person. He's had to deal with it a lot more, and
that's what he wants.
Yeah, and I do know even in meetings and so on, he'd be the type of one that would give his opinion if something happened, if you had a strong opinion. So I guess the Greenwood would be the best one to go to for that one. But we're getting a little distracted from the matter at hand. So Ashes of the Tyrant. You've mentioned last time that pretty much all of you went to the Sundering, and then your ideas for the Sundering got you guys wanting to write even more books in this series. A lot of the authors who participated in that series said they felt revitalized, so they wanted to write a lot more stuff and so on. Especially the bookends with Salvatore and Greenwood. Mm-hmm. They both felt really revitalized. So how are you feeling with the story of Farida and Mehen and so on? And I know you've written one book a year, which seems like kind of a nice relaxed pace compared to what Denning can put out, like 16.
I know, right? I'm never going to...
Imagine writing every 2 months.
I'm never going to be that person.
But do you have basically a plan for about a book a year for us to expect?
Well, I have this one comes out, and then I'm working on book 6, and that's going to kind of complete sort of a story arc, and then we'll see where we're going after that. I will say my books are at least twice as long as the standard Realms book, because I pick big stories and cram them full, so. It's less leisurely than it looks, because it's like Fire in the Blood is 200,000 words, which is basically double a normal Realms novel. They weren't thrilled with me for that, but it needed to be that long.
So when you write a book like this, being that it's so dense, how long is actual writing versus sending it in for them to fact check things, check it and make sure that the locations are right, making sure these races can actually do this, versus to check in the lore? Like, as an editor, when you had to do stuff like that, is that like the hardest job when it comes to this sort of thing, just making sure it fits?
It's actually not too bad, because most authors are sort of doing that work on their own when you're the editor. And it gets a little tricky when you bring in someone new, especially. It's interesting because authors who have, in my experience, authors who have experience writing fantasy on their own and who have had some success writing their own stories tend to have the hardest time transitioning to, no, you can't just make up these details. We have, this has already been decided. But when, as an author, I tend to, like, I build up a list of questions, and then I take them to my editor, and then I'll take them to Ed Greenwood for if it's a little weird thing. Like, I wanted to have someone in the story I'm working on right now make some tea, but where they are, they're not going to have tea, right? Because it wouldn't import. So I was like, what is growing in this area at this time of year that you could, or that you could dry ahead of time, that you could make into like a pot of tea, basically. Like, I want this detail that I know exists somewhere in the whole canon of the Realms and in your head, Ed, but what is it? And so you're doing that stuff ahead of time, and if you're an editor, if you're lucky, your author is also putting in footnotes that say, I found this here, I found this there, so you can make sure that everything's, cool. The bigger part of editing is being the person, because these books are done on such a sort of tight schedule. You don't get the opportunity really to take 5 years to write the book. They got to get done, and they got to get put out because they've already been sold. So having someone to kind of go over your first draft and say, this is working, but this is not, this subplot is not interesting enough to carry the middle of the book. This character could be really, really, really interesting, but you need to have them do this instead of that. Having someone to kind of help you hone the story, that's the most important part of that editing step in the middle. The fact checking is important, but it definitely, it's easier than I think most people realize. Because the bigger bulk of it is like, let's make this book as good as it can be.
And I'm assuming they give you well, you already have those because you were an editor, but plenty of resources to be able to get what you need. Like, yeah. I know some series provide, Star Wars, they have a holocron where they have like a guide of stuff that no one else is allowed to know and stuff like that.
Yes, and recently it got a lot smoother because they, when they did the digital versions of all the books, then all the digital files were available, and they have it set up so that it's searchable. So you can say, I had to ask questions about a dead god for this book, and I was just like, I need every scrap of information. And so they searched for that name, and then they sent me 8 PDFs of old game documents with the chunks highlighted and pulled out, and so it gets a little easier because it's a lot of material. Like, nobody owns all of these books, and even if you do, it's really hard to search. It's nice to have things like the FR Wiki and such, where you can sometimes kind of find, like, where did you hear about this demon? Like, which books do I need to double check? Because I have this one, but let's make sure that they all match up. But yeah, I figure it's probably about as much research as writing historical fiction. It's just it impresses people a little less.
So I have two questions left.
Okay.
This one's from a listener. They want to know, we know you're going to be writing more with Brimstone Angels, but if you were to write, theoretically, a standalone novel, and you could choose to co-write it with any of the current or past Realms authors, who would you pick and why?
That's tricky because I feel like I have a process that would just irritate the snot out of so many authors. But I don't know. There's a lot of really wonderful people that I'd love to work with. I get along really well with Julie Johnson. Editing her was just really, really smooth. Same thing actually, and he went over to Eberron, but I think Don Bassingthwaite would be a lot of fun to work with. And, I want to say anybody in the Sundering, but I feel like all of us were very it was a little, that was as much co-work as we can handle. And I would probably work with Ed really pretty well because he's like we said, he's pretty easygoing, very, and then as opposed to, but no. And I got a question like this yesterday, when I did an AMA, and my sort of cheeky answer is Elaine Cunningham. But both because she was a very talented writer and a really nice person. But I've joked with her before that when you're a woman writing in the Realms, it's only a matter of time before someone assumes you are Elaine Cunningham. Everybody I know, like Julie and myself and Rosemary Jones and Susan J. Morris, who is a Forgotten Realms editor, we've all, if you're at Gen Con and you hold still in the WotC booth for too long, someone will come up and ask you if you're Elaine Cunningham. Because there can only be one. I think it would make some people very confused.
Well, this listener says, I imagine you'd write really well with Kate Novak Grubb.
Oh, that's an interesting choice. That could be cool.
And then, of course, you'd have access to Jeff Grubb, who knows about everything.
What's funny is I know Jeff. I've met Jeff several times. I've actually never met Kate.
She is a little less in the open. But Jeff Grubb also was founder of, or helped found, 4 or 5 major franchises and has written all of them?
He's a pretty busy man, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they say you probably write really well with Kate Novak.
Interesting.
Okay, so the last question, it's modified to the one we usually ask, but we know where to find you now. So this one is, what are your plans for Farida in the future? Not exact details, because that ruins the books. But is it just the one more book that you're planning, or do you have broader plans to continue using her or allowing others to utilize parts of her story as things go, or do you plan on starting another series?
Well, I've got the one more book planned for sure, and that should kind of finish up what I call the Asmodeus arc. Completing that element of the story. I love writing these books, but I have other ideas. I have other ideas for these characters that I'd love to do, but when you write a book a year and they're big fat epic books, I don't really have time to write, these other stories I have ideas for. So I'm hoping I can squeeze in at least the series that I've been kind of getting excited about over the last year. That's kind of an epic fantasy family saga.
In the Realms or separate?
Separate, actually. This one. So we'll see how that goes.
Definitely want to talk about that one, because it'd be interesting to see where you go when you leave your comfort, your roots, and then where you have complete freedom. I imagine it'd be a very different experience to just suddenly not have the.
It's funny.
Greenwood.
Every time I've done it, every chance I've gotten to work on it, it's been really interesting because it's almost like if you do yoga and you do a pose and it I don't know, you're doing like down dog or something, and you think, okay, this is how it goes, and then you go and you have like a teacher say, no, you need to like flatten your back like this, and they shift you, and all of a sudden you have all these other muscles that are like getting worked and stretched and sore, and you're like, what the heck? This is the same thing. And it's kind of like that, like so much of it is very similar, but enough of it is very different working in, writing in your own setting versus shared world that it's a little disorienting. I find it weird too whenever I have had to do, I've done short stories for, like I just recently did a short story for Rob Schwalb's Shadow of the Demon Lord. And for that, we were told we could use our own world. We could use our own setting. We just have to use this concept of the Demon Lord. And I opted to do my own setting, and there's a certain amount that, like, you're not starting, like, front loading the setting. You're kind of building it as you go, and then you're going back and kind of making sure it's all smooth and feels like a full place. And I always feel like this can't possibly be working. Like, it can't possibly be gelling together like a setting. But every time I've done, a short story like that, that's actually been one of the things I've been complimented on. Like, the setting is really interesting. It's so different because you don't have all these books to point to and back you up. It's just all spilling out of your head while you're doing it. So it's a different experience, but I think I'll enjoy it.
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing more about that one. But we're going to wrap this one up. Of course, you can find Ashes of the Tyrant in bookstores everywhere: Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Actually, that's pretty much the only bookstores I can possibly think of that still exist.
Your local independent bookstore.
That too, if you can find one.
We have some good ones in Seattle. I wish I could get to them more often.
Last time I walked through Seattle, yes, I saw lots of awesome bookstores. I had to keep my wife at bay. All of them. But here in Utah, we don't have that many, sadly. Or Alaska, where I grew up. I miss Walden's, actually, in Borders. But you can find it in bookstores everywhere. It's in hardcover. It's in ebook. And it's in audiobook with Audible, which, of course, you can get whatever one you want. Whatever one fits your boat, floats your boat, get it. Because Audible's always solid. Ebooks, well, they're convenient. And the hardcover, it's great to have that book on your shelf. And it looks really good on my table right now.
Isn't that a pretty cover?
Yeah, well, that is a great cover.
I have not gotten an answer as to who did the cover, but I also forgot to check the jacket, because it usually says in there. So.
Is this the same person who did the last one?
I don't know. That's the problem. The last one was done by Min Yum, who did Lesser Evils cover as well, and does a lot of Magic cards.
Yes.
But I actually don't know if he did this one, because somehow I've asked a couple of times in email, but I've asked it with like 3 other questions, and so that hasn't gotten answered. But I just remembered I need to check the jacket to find out. And find out and post it on Facebook. Like, this is who did this beautiful cover that we've all been drooling over.
I don't see it among initial look, but I'm not looking that close. But yeah, it's a beautiful cover, and my favorite is still Fire into Blood as far as the cover goes. But this definitely has. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same artist or one who does the current Magic card sets, because very familiar looking.
Yeah.
So, thank you for being on, though. This is fantastic. I love having you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And, yeah, congratulations on another baby.
Thank you. Good luck with yours.